Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to, I believe we're now on week 4 of Mastering Difficult Conversations Online. So for May 15th, 2017. Really good conversations over the last week. So, week 3, we had talked about the different listening styles, and we had really dove into some of the questions that some of you had around your mastering difficult conversations. So the difficult conversations that you're planning on having. So if you remember last week, we talked about those, the 3 different listening styles of the internal listener. So that's all getting caught up in our thoughts, how we could relate. It's kind of the listening to respond style, right? So not highly effective or productive when it comes to managing our difficult conversations. We've also got that focused listening, and that focused listening is so being really in tune with that other person, being able to, like we had given the examples of a mother with a sick child, or 2 lovers, sitting on a park bench next to each other, really in tune with what each other's saying, being able to finish each other's sentences, really that focused, concentrated listening. And then that third style of the global, right? So that you're picking up kind of everything in the environment as well. So possible distractions, change in body language, change in tone, to give you cues on how the communication is going, and an opportunity to pause, reflect, or ask further questions to ensure that there's understanding in your communication. So really, when it comes to conflict and to resolving conflict, or really mastering our difficult conversations, we want to have a fine balance between styles, to the focused and the global, right? Just kind of a mix of that, so that we're really being as good of communicators verbally as well as on the receiving end of the listening to the message, and ensuring that we're not producing further conflict by misunderstanding. So the other thing that we had last week for homework was to be able to reflect on our own listening style. So to be able to take opportunity to observe, which listening styles we're participating in throughout the last week, as well as what others are participating in. And it's kind of interesting when we're in tune with these concepts, how easily it becomes to start to be able to pick up the different examples. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, when I realize that, my 8-year-old has got the internal listening style when he's being asked to complete chores or homework. It's not really helping. So, but being aware of my own too, and slowing myself down, or even having that increased self-awareness has helped me navigate through some difficult discussions, or potentially highly conflict discussions over the last week as well. So I hope that you can see the difference in those 3 styles, but also have had an opportunity to observe over the last week different opportunities of where you've participated in, or seeing other people participate in the different listening styles as well. We also had a really great Q&A that was live on Facebook this week. So Kyle Kalu, who is our executive and leadership coach, decided to take on the role of love coach. Really, with Kyle's expertise of those DISC profiling, is great. But Kyle's got such a great lens when it comes to relationship communication. So I was glad that he was able to join. One of the participants had talked about, some of the miscommunications, or, the feeling of, that impatient or disengagement in conversation with her husband. And I think, I definitely really related to a lot of that conversation. And Kyle had talked about, trying a different approach. When we come into their difficult conversations, especially if this is something that you've had to go over and over again, if we're always approaching it the same way, it becomes challenging for the other person, not just to come to assumptions or go into that habitual conversation like we have talked about before, and go into the kind of that mindset and respond the same old way. So, Kyle had some interesting things and suggestions about, being able to set aside time, watching our language once again, that we're not doing the, I need to talk to you about something, role modeling some of the behaviors, being specific with your requests of what you really want and getting to that focus. And Kyle and I were talking afterwards about, he had given the example on the call of, the friend of his that always wanted his significant other to come through the door at the end of the day and brush up and give them a kiss and want to know everything about their day, and was highly disappointed when that just did not happen. And it's interesting that in my relationship, I've shared with you guys before that I am an I, and my spouse is a C. And sometimes he just doesn't express it or articulate or communicate the same way that I do. Nothing wrong with it. And in fact, it works really well in our relationship as long as we're really in tune with one another. So because my spouse doesn't mix words or do a whole lot of fluffy or emotional expression, I actually have to become very specific with the request. So if it is, please come off your laptop so that you can come and sit next to me on the couch and hold my hand for a half hour before I have to go to bed or before I have to go do something else, that's usually how specific my requests get. And it used to really frustrate me. But it's not that. It's just that he really just does not view or see things the same way. In the same sense that for him to be able to be very specific that he's on his laptop to be able to debrief from his day, that it's not about ignoring me or it's not about having conversation with me, that he literally is just debriefing his day and sorting himself out and re-energizing. And part of what we're going to talk about today is that, along with mastering some difficult conversations within my relationship with him, having an understanding of how each other communicates, what each other needs, along with those personality profiles, we've also had to learn how to set some healthy boundaries with one another and be able to ask for what we want, ask for what we need, but also set some boundaries in place so that we don't trip into additional conflict. So we'll talk about that today too, only because there's been several questions that have come through over the last couple of days of what happens if my mastering or my difficult conversation is a boundary setting conversation. How does those personality types, how does listening come in? How does all of that kind of wrap into setting boundaries? In fact, even on the Q&A, somebody had said, well, do I really need to ask permission of, is this a good time to talk, right? Like, can't we just have normal conversations, especially in our most intimate relationships, and resolve some of this stuff as we're going along? And the answer is, yes, of course. And I don't really think that it's about asking for permission. And we'll get into that when we further talk about boundary setting tonight. So Donna's with me on the call today, but is anybody like Donna? Did you have any questions or anything, or were you all good? Okay. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the conversation we need to have. We now really have a great idea of the words we're going to use. We have identified the best time to be able to have the conversations. So tonight we're really going to start to take a wider look at anticipating and understanding scenarios around dealing with the conflict and the conversation. So during a conflict, you can either engage or restrain. Okay, so for those that engage, you're more likely to actively participate or approach conflict. One way is to think of it is that if we were a camera in the corner of the room, it would pick up things that you were doing in the situation. We can engage in a conflict in productive ways. So for example, being open and direct, and in destructive ways. So for example, that would be overpowering someone by talking over them, withdrawing, stonewalling. So However, for those that restrain during conflict are more likely to hold back or even avoid conflict. Using the same camera idea, it would be more difficult to pick up restraining behaviors because they're more subtle. So similar to engaging behaviors, you can restrain in conflict in productive ways. So stepping back to consider all the facts rather than just responding or reacting, and in destructive ways. So once again, that withdrawing from or stonewalling others. So each of us tends to use one approach more than the other. Your preference can be really about your disc style. So for example, those with D or I's tend to use more of the engaging behaviors during conflict, where those with the S and the C styles tend to use more of the restraining behaviors during conflict. So I just want you to take a quick moment here, and I want you to be able to, I'm going to set I'm going to use a timer tonight because we've got a lot to be able to go through. And I just want to take the next 2 minutes. And why isn't my clicker working? And I want you to come up with a list of common behaviors, both productive and destructive. And so think about those different styles that we spoke about. So with the DISC profiles. Oops. So remember that D is for dominance. So active, questioning. I for influence, active and accepting. S is steadiness, thoughtful and accepting, and C, conscientious, thoughtful, and questioning. So just take a couple of minutes, think about different scenarios, and come up with a list of behaviors, either productive or destructive, that would fall into these DISC styles. So we've already talked about that for the D's and I's tend to be more engaging, so they're more approaching the conflict. They're more likely to go after it. What are some of the productive or destructive behaviors for them? And then the S's and the C's tend to be more restraining. And so just think about those. We're going to go more and specifically in those in a second. So I'm going to start the clock of 2 minutes just to kind of brainstorm both productive and destructive behaviors. All righty. So in some of those ways that I thought of, I just, and I hate that I pick on the D's, but I totally do. I think it's D's that I have most challenging conversations with. So, I just think about maybe that they get to a point of being insensitive, right? I think for I's, I become overly emotional, right? So I can end up derailing the entire conversation. The S's and the C's may withdraw. In fact, the S's might be more of people pleasers, right? So they tend to just kind of throw in the towel, maybe not have good, healthy boundaries or good at sustaining those healthy boundaries. So it might be good about talking about it and talking it through, but the next time the boundaries cross, they just let it be crossed again. So that's kind of the destructive behaviors. The productive behaviors, for the D's might be that they're going to get results. So it really, the conflict, because they're so engaged in it, could be resolved very quickly, right? Because they're so fact-based and not emotional-based, it could be, just clearing up the misunderstanding. For those S's that they're going to take the time to be able to consider everybody's feelings, look out for people's feelings. If there's more than one person involved, they're going to probably solicit, some feedback from everybody. And I also think that, those conscientious are C's, they get to the root cause, right? So those are some of the productive and destructive lists that came up for me during this activity. So we're going to go through specifically, now that I need to find my notes. So we're going to take some look at some examples and take a look at each of those DISC styles and see how they stack up when they come to both productive and destructive tendencies. So the engaged ones are for dominance. So their destructive tendencies tend to be the insensitivity, right? Not really feelings driven, pretty impatient because they're so results driven, and they're the fast pace, remember? They can create the win-lose. So D's have a tendency in their destructive behaviors to do, it's my way or the highway, right? So good at boundary setting, but not so much of the flexibility that we see in the S's and the C's. Overpowers others, right? So they can end up being completely dominating the entire conversation and not allowing others to either express their feelings or to be heard in the conflict, right? So really not having an opportunity to have it be resolved. Okay, let's look at some of the positive tendencies or productive tendencies. So they get straight to the point, right? No fluff, no beating around the bush. D's are going to deliver the straight goods. D's, it's not to say that they don't struggle with difficult conversations, but they're okay to acknowledge the tough issues, right? So it's usually not the content that's hard for them to be able to master in difficult conversations. It's more of their approach, and it's more about getting that result of having the conflict, just be done, and having long-lasting results. So it's like I said, it's their approach and their finish, not so much that they want to avoid the difficult conversation or the tough issues. And they also have the willingness to have the objective debates, right? So it's important to have both sides of the story come out. It's important to have devil's advocates. It's important to have realists of the groups. And this is one of the productive tendencies of the D group, is to be able to flush out realities or challenge ideas to ensure that there is an overall consensus, or that we're all moving towards a common objective. Okay, so for our I's, the destructive tendencies. And that is so true of what an I really looks like. I love that little puppy picture. So overly emotional, and they can talk over others. So similar to the D, right? The D dominance, where the I wants to have all of their emotions heard, and every opinion and every thought and every standpoint heard. The impulsiveness, right? So I had talked about before about those emotions derailing the difficult conversation, but it's also the impulsiveness, right? So getting so distracted by the feeling, or that we want to have the conversation now and we haven't thought about good timing because we're lost in the emotion. It can end up glossing over the tension. So they want to get to the result similar to the D's, but they don't do it for sometimes the right reasons. Sometimes it's just to get to the relief of the emotion or get the conflict over and done with, so that they can gloss over the tension. And I would say that this is where I've struggled before in the past with difficult conversations is because my emotions are triggered, I can end up taking things more personally. And so I's tend to make more personal attacks too, usually in retaliation that they feel that their security, even in their emotions, have been threatened in some way. So more personal attacks for the destructive tendencies. Now, when we look at the productive tendencies, they communicate, with empathy, right? And we had talked about that this was part of the way to de-escalate or keep the conflict from escalating, was to be in empathy, when we talked about overcoming obstacles, right? To have an empathetic point of view. So our eyes, really, they try on other people's feelings quite easily to be able to navigate those through conflict. So that would be a productive tendency that eyes have. They encourage open dialogue, right? So these are the engagers, right? D's and I's are engagers, so they're going to encourage open dialogue and emotional expression. They also provide reassurance, right? So, more of the optimist. I talked about the D styles being, more of the realist. I would say that the I's tend to be more optimistic, right? So that they are really solution focused to be able to move things to a positive realm. And then once again, the verbalizing of emotions. So when we talk about the restrain, these are the ones that have a tendency to avoid or withdraw from conflict. We'll look at the steadiness, the S's of the group first. So when we're looking at destructive tendencies of their styles, when it comes to engage or restrain, they tend to withdraw from it, from all of the conflict. This is also what I was talking about, a bit of the people pleasing, right? So they might surrender in the conflict of going, okay, fine, and really when it's not fine, it's giving into pleasing others, just so that the conflict's over and done with, and that we can all carry on. But they haven't really been heard. The conflict's not been really resolved for them. It's more just to get it over and done with. And so that speaks to ignores problems. So they let issues simmer beneath the surface. So this is also, it's kind of like I talk about with some of my clients that are S's about the stockpiling, right? So they tend to stockpile resentment. So they don't say anything the first time somebody makes them mad. They don't really say anything the second time that they say is something that makes them mad. And then it ends up usually getting to the point where we've got complete withdrawal, so complete restraint from the conversation, or there is this burst of conflict, right? And then that's when you get well, in 1942, you said to me this, right? Because we've got all of this stockpile of resentment. And resentment's a killer. And part of the reason why this is where I got a lot of questions this week was around setting boundaries, right? The D's going to go in and be like, my way or the highway. You either do this or I'm done, right? The I's going to go in and talk a lot about what they will tolerate and what they won't tolerate, and a lot about their feelings and how they need their feelings to be heard and their feelings to be honored through the boundary setting. And the steadiness and the conscientious really, they can get to the point of setting healthy boundaries, but it's a matter of if they're going to hold themselves and others accountable to those healthy boundaries. And so in the destructive tendencies, this is definitely a problem of compromising their own boundaries for the sake of just having the conflict over. So the other destructive tendency there is avoids tension. On the productive tendency side, though, We've got the show's flexibility, right? So they're not as hard lined as D's can be, right? They're able to come to compromise. They're able to negotiate. They have some flexibility and bend. They can start to get their thinking wrapped around a different solution. And really, they do look out for other people's feelings, right? So the S is going to call attention to somebody that's quiet in the room. The S's are really good at that global listening style, right? Where they take in all of the information. So they're going to notice that, maybe it's even another S with the guy that's saying, fine, no worries, sure, that works, but is got his arms crossed and, is red in the face, right? They're going to be able to see that there's other feelings being expressed that might not be being expressed verbally. They communicate tactfully, right? So where the eyes are kind of like off the radar with their emotions and all over the place, and can sometimes actually be inappropriate or uncomfortable expression of emotions. And the D's can end up being very viewed as insensitive. And I don't want to make it confused that the D's don't have feelings. It's just that they can be perceived as being insensitive to feelings just because they're not driven that way. The S's really help to be able to communicate tactfully with consideration of both D, I, and C's need for expression of emotion or how they express emotion to be able to have those solutions come to the surface. And this speaks to that global listening, right? So that they really listen to others and then finding the compromises. So then we go to conscientiousness, so our C's. So the destructive tendencies with the C group is the defensiveness, right? So I would say that they are, they're more likely, and we get to this in a second, because they can be overly critical in their analyzing and being able to really go through to be able to find the root causes of those problems. They can be very critical about the flaws in the conflict, but even towards themselves, right? That becomes the double-edged sword. And so being called out on something, being confronted with something, having a difficult conversation brought to them, sometimes the destructive tendency is to become defensive as another way to restrain or avoid having the conflict, right? They use the passive aggressive tactics, right? So I find, with some of the clients that are C's, it can be about self-preservation, right? It's about, I'll hurt you before you hurt me. Or it's about, I'm giving you enough of a cue with the sarcasm that you should be able to pick up that I'm upset, but I'm not really going to say that I'm upset because I really don't want to engage in the conflict, right? I would say that I have a lot of male C's in my life. Like my father would also be a C, and my mom and I are both I's. Something that we talk about is we talk about the stomp, right? When my dad gets angry, he stomps. So we always know what's going on, but it's so passive aggressive, right? Instead of just saying what you're upset about, that he stomps. So it's my little funny about my father. Like I said before, they can become overly critical, usually as a defense mechanism. I don't think that these people intend of hurting people or being insensitive. It's literally about defense of keeping them in their own cocoon, right? Like you're wrong before I am, right? And that they can isolate themselves, definitely. And overanalyzes the situation. So there is a point of thinking things through way too much, or even making assumptions in the analysis that aren't accurate, or thinking too deeply into something. I know sometimes getting caught up in my own emotion, that there's been things that have been misinterpreted what I said, but being overanalyzed, to death in a situation of that's not what I meant to communicate. That's not what I intended when I said, but then having, the defensiveness of a C come out to almost be accusatory of that I meant something totally different. So just really, really analytical folks, and sometimes it can be too much. But they have some great productive tendencies too, right? So like I said before, they find the root cause. These ones really are the problem solvers, really are. And it's because they are so thoughtful and reflective. And because they're also the masters of, so forced into conflict, that's where we see the destructive tendencies. The right timing of conflict or a revisit of conflict, this is really where our strong problem solvers are, right? I want to be able to talk about this right now. I want to talk it all through. I want to get to the solution. I want to cry my face off. I want to, then I want to have the honeymoon phase after the conflict. I want to have all of the good stuff, all of the bad stuff, but I want to have it now. Well, my husband is not that way at all, right? He needs the time to reflect. He needs to be able to think things through. He is the C. But, and I noticed, and nobody tell him this. I'm just joking. He already knows this. But we have better and more productive conversations when we take the time to reflect, when we take the time to cool off, when he has some time to be able to put together, articulate his words and put some thought into the words that he wants, when he gives me time to be able to come out of my emotional roller coaster so that I'm centered and that I'm grounded, we have way more productive conflict. So they find the root causes, they'll sort out all of the issues, even issues that may have not initially been viewed or seen in it, because they get to that root cause, which is nice because that way you're not doing a whole lot of band-aid conversation either, right? Because sometimes conflicts, especially if you find that you're having circular conversations, it's the same old difficult conversation that we always have over and over and over again. It's because you haven't gotten to the root cause. You're staying surfacey in that conversation, and you need to take it the layer deeper to be able to find out what it really is all about. Sorry, not that I want to derail this, but there was a conversation that I had this week, and we were really going around and around in circles, like never going to get anything done. And it wasn't until the other person that I was talking to, I wouldn't say that he's a C, but like we have talked about with the DISC profiles before, we possess all four characteristics, right? Of the D, the I, the S, the C. So I'm not really sure what he is, but the one question that he had said to me is, what's really making you upset in this? And that triggered me to go, oh, we're going round and round in circles, and I haven't really talked about what I'm really upset about. And so, anytime I start to see circular behaviors from myself, or it's even when I'm working with clients, I got clients that come in and they'll talk about the same thing over and over and over again, right? And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So it is about taking yourself to that next level of awareness, of self-awareness. And part of that's going to have the difficult conversation with yourself of asking, really, where is the root cause? What am I really wanting from this, right? Is there something that I'm missing? And if you've got a really great C in your corner, they are awesome sounding boards because they kind of cut through the chase and they're able to find root cause really easily. So honor my husband is very, very good for me that way, because he's so centered and so grounded that anytime I have emotional conflict, with family, with friends, with coworkers, whatever, honor is a great sounding board to be able to use. So they give people space, and the other productive tendency is that they focus on facts, which is also good for all of us. So those are kind of the engage and restraint, and something that you want to be able to keep in mind when you're thinking through, or when you start to have these conversations and other things come up, right? And Susanna, you joined us, but I had said earlier that we had done a 2-minute activity where we just took a couple of minutes to really think about the destructive and productive tendencies on all 4 DISC styles, so that we could start to identify them as they come up in conversation, right? If I've got somebody that's, was adamant about a personal boundary before, and now has just thrown their hands up in the air and said, fine, whatever works. I know that I'm probably dealing with an S, and I'm probably dealing with some of the destructive tendencies. And so how can I turn this into a productive conversation where we get to a good place? If I'm talking to somebody that's more my way or the highway, or is coming across insensitive, I might be talking to a D, I might be talking to an I too, depending, I might be talking to a C as well, with the passive aggressiveness and the over criticism. So knowing those kind of destructive and what their productive tendencies are, I can help flip the conversation. So if my difficult conversation is with somebody that's more of a C, I might ask them to help me. So when we think about our initial words, using the I statements, I need your help to find a solution. I'm looking for a solution. I'm struggling to find a solution. The C's are going to jump to my assistance, right? The S's are really going to hear me out, especially if my conflict is about not being heard. If I can slow down and I can tone myself down so that I'm not so in your face, S's are really going to be able to hear me out, right? If, I can talk to, if I could talk to the D's about, what their opinion is, or if it's a challenging, tough conversation that needs to be had, the D's are going to be able to help me out through that. If I need the D's, if there's something for me to learn from the conflict or from the difficult conversation, those D's, I can see that their ability to do an objective debate isn't a bad thing. So I don't need to get defensive in it. I can be open-minded to be able to hear, and I might be able to learn something about a different point of view. So I think that those are all really, really important things that we need to consider as the conversation's starting to unfold. So I wanted to finish off tonight talking about boundaries. Lots of questions that came in of my difficult conversation is a boundary setting. Do I need to ask permission? This person has crossed my boundaries time and time again. I'm not getting any results. Is it something that I'm doing wrong when it's setting the boundaries, or is the person just like, I should just sever the relationship because they can't respect my boundaries? And how does all of this kind of fall into those boundary setting conversations? And so boundaries, for me, I am responsible. I'm responsible for my own happiness and my own fulfillment. At the end of the day, it's up to me. It's up to me to take action. I can't possibly hold a resentment to somebody for crossing my boundaries if I've never had the conversation with them. If I've never told them what my boundaries are, or if I've never told them that they've crossed the boundaries, I am responsible for that outcome. I'm also responsible to teach people how to treat me. Because we don't come with rule books, and life doesn't come with, if A happens, do B and C, right? And so some of it is trial and error. Some of it is getting comfortable about yourself, the self-awareness of yourself, about the relationships. It's about having those difficult conversations of, what's tolerated and what's not tolerated. But also, it is definitely my responsibility to put my hand up when I feel that I've had a boundary being crossed. So I want to talk about the 10 key elements to setting healthy boundaries. And not only, I think setting boundaries, like building better boundaries, but also maintaining them. So having healthy boundaries really means about knowing and understanding what your limits are. Okay. So similar to what we've talked about with mastering difficult conversations, I'm responsible for setting those boundaries, for teaching people how to treat me. I'm not responsible of whether somebody decides to agree with my boundaries or not. Does that make sense? Like, they decide that they don't care about my boundaries, well, then that's a different choice that I need to make at that point of time. But my boundary is my boundary, and I've got a right to it. And people that love and respect me and want to be in relationships with me in whatever capacity, that I hold them accountable to the boundaries that I've set. And if they decide that it's something that they don't want to hear, then at that point of time, like somebody had asked me, I don't ask their permission if I can share my boundaries with them. My boundaries are my boundaries. So the first part is about naming your limits. So you can't set good boundaries if you're unsure about where you stand. So you have to identify your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual limits. So I always suggest that you consider what you can tolerate and accept, and what makes you uncomfortable or stressed. Because uncomfortable and stressed, or tolerate, or like what you can tolerate and accept, those feelings really help us identify what our limits are. Okay. The second key is to tune into your feelings. So 2 key feelings in others that are red flags or cues that we're letting go of our boundaries is discomfort and resentment. So if we think of these feelings on a continuum, like from 1 to 10, 6 to 10 being the higher zone, if you're at the high end of that continuum during an interaction or a situation, really start asking yourself, what is causing that stress? What is it about this interaction or the person's expectation that's bothering me? Because like resentment usually comes from being taken advantage of or not being appreciated. And it's often a sign that we're pushing ourselves either beyond our own limits because we feel guilty, so that people pleasing, so wanting to be a good, like in my situation, wanting to be a good daughter, a good wife, a good coworker, a good friend, or someone else is imposing their expectations, values on us. So when someone acts in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's a cue that they may be violating or crossing a boundary. Okay, so tune into the feelings. And some people have, it's tuning into your intuition, right? Usually our feelings are really good compasses. So be direct is the third. So with some people, maintaining healthy boundaries doesn't require a direct or clear-cut dialogue. So usually this is the case if the people have similar communication styles, right? So an I is gonna have an easier time communicating boundaries with I's. And a D with a D, right? Like, because we kind of speak the same speak, we've got the same preference, right? We have kind of that same personality style. So we approach each other pretty similarly. So, but with others, especially those that have a different personality or background, you might find that you need to be more direct about your boundaries. So I want you to consider the following example. So one person feels that challenging someone's opinion is a healthy way of communicating. But to another person, this feels disrespectful and tense. So I just described most of the difficult conversations that everybody's experiencing, right? So there are other times that you might need to be direct. So for example, in a romantic relationship, time can be a boundary issue, right? Partners might need to talk about how much time they need to maintain their sense of self and how much time they need to spend together, right? So, and I've shared this example before. My husband gets home from work. He sits on. He really likes he likes watching global news and researching stuff on the internet or reading foreign newspapers. That's what he likes to do. That's how he debriefs his day. That's how he's very introverted. So that's how he goes and re-energizes himself. He's had to be with people all day, giving direction, leading teams, whatever. He's exhausted by the time he gets home. So he just wants to be able to sit, read his news, and be able to refuel. I am 100% polar opposite. I'm tired at the end of my day, but I re-energize from my social relationships and from expressing myself and getting excited about things and everything else. So I want to like tell him everything, every second of my day, every detail that happened, everything else. And at the end of his day, he's like, I am like sensory overload for this man, right? So we need to have boundaries, right? So that I understand that at the end of the day, he needs his time to decompress. And at the end of the day, he knows that I need to be heard too. So, I usually will cook dinner or he'll cook dinner, but we give time to one another to settle into our own space. And dinner is where we talk about our days. It also gives my children an ability to talk about their day. And so we're open and receptive and we're all sitting at the table and there's none of these technology devices everywhere to distract us from it. So it gives us space to decompress and the space to be able to come together. So that's kind of a time setting boundary that we've had to have. And I would say that at the beginning of our relationship, it was a pretty passive aggressive conversation that we would have. And now it's more direct, right? So that I still need reminders, especially if I've had something really eventful happen in my day that I want to share with him, like right now. And, so that he has to be direct with, give me 10 minutes, give me 15 minutes, just let me settle in before we dive into conversation. Okay. So the next element, give yourself permission. So fear, guilt, and self-doubt are big potential pitfalls. We might fear the other person's response if we set or enforce our boundaries. We might feel guilty by speaking up or saying no to a family member. Many believe that they should be able to cope with a situation or say yes because they're a good daughter or a good son, even though they feel drained or taken advantage of. So we might wonder if we even deserve to have boundaries in the first place. So boundaries aren't just a sign of a healthy relationship. Boundaries are a sign of self-respect. So give yourself permission to set the boundaries and work to preserve them, sorry. So this is the thing. If I'm saying yes to you, the universe balance says that I'm saying no to something else. So if I'm saying yes to my family all the time, chances are that I'm saying no to myself all the time. So in order to have that balance, I need to be able to set good boundaries of that no is okay. It's not the end of the world, right? And I've also, probably recently in the last year, I've given myself permission that no is a complete answer. That it's not no because blah, 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 because I feel bad. So I want to be able to supply the backstory of why I'm saying no. I've had to get past that. And that no is okay. No. And sometimes it's because I really just don't want to. And that no is okay. So give yourself permission that, like I said, boundaries are a sign of self-respect, and that they're a healthy thing to have. To be able to practice self-awareness. So if boundaries are all about honing in on your feelings and honoring them, it's a good thing to have. But practice the self-awareness and if you notice yourself slipping or not sustaining your boundaries. So it's about really starting to ask yourself, like, what's changed? Right? Like, what's changed from when I said that I know that I don't tolerate that to now, what's changed? And usually for me, it's because it's triggered some other feeling, usually of that fear, that guilt, that self-doubt, right? And I have to be able to go revisit it. So I have to be able to consider, like, what am I doing, or what is the other person doing, or what is in this situation that's making me resentful or stressed? And I had to be able to mull over my options. Like, what am I going to do about this situation? What do I have control over this situation? What don't I have control over this situation? And a lot of times I have zero control over what's going on. The only thing that I have control over is my response. And so there's been times, obviously, like I'm not perfect, as I'm sure nobody else is, that I compromised one of those boundaries that I've set, and I've had to go back and own that in that conversation of, I really meant to be able to hold this boundary that we've talked about before, and I don't want to compromise on it. So I've had to go back and had kind of a secondary layer of boundary setting when I've given somebody permission to cross that line, or found that I'm slipping and not sustaining it. The good one the example that I can give you for this one is usually about bedtime with my child. So he's like, 5 more minutes, Mom. And it's really tempting, but he is so grumpy in the morning when I don't make him go to bed on time. And so I've talked to him about like no manipulation, no nothing. You make sure that you take care of your responsibilities, bedtime snacks done, pajamas are done, teeth are brushed by the time it's bedtime. And then that way it's lights out, we go to bed. But there are some times when, I'm finishing up something to do with work. I've got a client that's on the phone. I've got other things going on. And all of a sudden I'm like, 5 more minutes. It's me doing the 5 more minutes, right? And then I'm wondering how we've undone all of the work that we've just done on getting to bed on time. But it's because I compromised, right? So I've had to go back with my 8-year-old and say, you know what? Like, that was not good of Mommy to do. Like, Mommy just compromised on that. So no, we have to get back on routine. And we have to hold each other accountable that bedtime is bedtime, right? So that's an example I can give you for practicing self-awareness. So easy to do as parents. Okay. So it's also to consider your past and your present. So how were you raised along with your role in the family can become an additional obstacle in setting and preserving boundaries. Right? If you've learned this behavior of coping or watching, like I'm telling you, Dad stomped around when when I was little. We all sat up and paid attention, right? Now we laugh because I'm an adult and I can see it for what it is. But the first time I ever had a partner that stomped around mad, it triggered everything from the resentment or that passive aggressiveness, or it triggered all of those feelings of fear or hurt or what have I done, or that self-doubt that I used to experience when my dad used to do that. So it's really considering how your past has influenced your ability to hold boundaries. So it's even if you held the role of caretaker, you learn to focus on others, letting yourself be drained emotionally or physically, and ignoring your own needs might have really become the norm for you, right? So I think it's also that you have to think about the people that you surround yourself with. Are those relationships reciprocal? And that was kind of a hard question to ask myself, because I needed to evaluate some of my friendships. Is there healthy give and take? Right? I was talking to a client the other day around this, and actually I was talking to a participant that's in this workshop as well around boundary setting. And because I'm a life coach, I have a couple of friends that they call me when they're in crisis mode. But that's like the only time I hear from them is when they're in crisis mode. Something's going on in their life that's unraveling. So they're calling their friend who happens to be a life coach to be able to resolve, and then they disappear and I don't hear from them until next crisis, right? So I've had to practice difficult conversations of asking for the reciprocation in our relationship. That there's times that I need support too. There's times that I would like to be able to talk to them about what's going on in my life, or talk to them about problems that I need help solving. And that part of my healthy boundary is that I give myself permission to be honest, to ask for what I need in those. So make self-care a priority. We don't do this enough. I think it's especially, I'm going to make a total gender stereotype, but I really think that it's harder for women to do this than anything else. So it's about it, that giving yourself permission to put yourself first. But it also means recognizing the importance of your feelings and honoring them, right? The feeling, like we had already talked about, feelings serve purpose, right? Tune into our feelings. It gives us an indication. They give us the cues. It helps us take care of our well-being, and it also helps us tell what the story is about what makes us happy and what makes us unhappy. Putting ourselves first, it gives energy, peace of mind, and positive outlook to be more present with others and be there for them. And when we're in a better place, we can be better people. So I always share about how I cannot transmit something that I haven't got. So I thought, and just quickly I'll share this with you, I really thought that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and that I was going to bake cookies and do crafts with my children. They were all going to know the ABCs before they were 2. And about 5 weeks after Darius was born, I totally knew that I wanted to go back to work. So I am a better mom because I work. And it was a hard thing to kind of get to because, there a lot of pressure. I've got friends that stay at home too. There's nothing wrong with staying at home moms, but there's nothing wrong with working moms too. I think it's whatever's going to help you be the best that you can be for your children. But it's really about honoring that. And getting to a place that it's about being a priority. A lot of my identity for myself is in the work that I do, in the contribution that I make, in the impact that I make to people's lives. And so for me, when I'm able to go to work and fill up my own bucket, I'm able to come home and then help my children fill their buckets. So seek support. So boundaries are not easy. Boundaries are definitely not easy if you've never had boundaries before. Boundaries are not easy if you haven't been able to make them stick. Boundaries aren't easy if part of your difficult conversation is about holding people accountable for their part. So seek support. And this could be, whether it's through a support group, through maybe it's at a church or a counseling service, good friends, your employee assistance program at work, or looking at working with a coach. So a lot of the clients that I work with, we do talk about boundary setting, and we talk about getting to our truths and honoring our truths in our authentic selves, about how becoming vulnerable really becomes empowering to create the lives that we want to live by our own design. And so some of that is role playing and practicing our truth through boundary setting. So if you need the support, seek it, ask for help. And then second last one. So be assertive, right? It's not just enough to create the boundaries. We actually have to follow through with them. And so it's not about being the emotional I that I am way up here. And it's not about being passive aggressive down here. It's about being grounded. Assertiveness happens in centeredness, right? So when I've taken care of my feelings, when I've gotten clear on what the boundaries are, then I'm able to go and be assertive. That is supposed to say assertive, by the way, but nobody judges me on my spelling on my PowerPoint. And then this does not happen overnight. So we start small. So start with small boundaries, right? Like I said, it's important to be able to build on your success. So if I can achieve a boundary setting with my children, then I'm going to feel more confident to be able to start building boundaries with my husband. If I have success with building boundaries with my husband, then I might be able to do that with my parents, with my coworkers, with my boss, with whatever that works. So start somewhere small so that you can start to build your success, and then you can try to take on larger or more challenging boundaries. So I hope that really helps answer some of the questions that came out about boundary setting. So homework. So first of all, there's So next Monday is Victoria Day in Canada. So, because we do have a couple of people that are overseas. So there isn't going to be a webinar next Monday. There was a lot of people that had emailed me saying, I'm not going to be here, I'm going to be away. I'm also going to be away. So I think what we'll end up doing is that we'll reschedule the call because I want to have a call next week. What I would like to be able to do is hold it on Tuesday at 5. I'm not sure that that works for everybody, but at least then there would be a recording. And that way I make sure everybody's back in town after the long weekend. So I'm going to send out an email about that. Okay. So this week, I want you to be able to reflect on the engage or restrain. Do you engage in conflict or conversation, or do you restrain? Do you really withdraw from it? Really think about those, like have that self-awareness around the productive and the destructive behaviors. I also want you to consider about the setting boundaries conversations that we had tonight, and about is there areas of opportunity for you to set boundaries? Is there work that you need to do about setting boundaries? Once again, maybe it's that you're able to create boundaries, but you're just not able to preserve them. So is that the work that you need to be able to do? And then at this point of time, do you need further support? And what I wanted to be able to offer here, like we do in most of our workshops at Change My Life Coaching, is I wanted to be able to offer you a session, a one-to-one session with me as a coach. So if there are situations that you're struggling with, some of the ideas, some of the concepts that we've reviewed this far that you're still finding that you've got challenges with, that you want to be able to debrief, I'd ask that you email me so that we can set up some one-to-one time to go through it specifically. If it's more that you've got the one-off question and you just want to be able to ask that for the Q&A this week, absolutely send me that question as well. The Q&A this week will be about boundary setting and about the engage and restrain. So if you've got questions about tonight's content, please send that over in an email, send it through the Facebook group, and we'll be sure that we address those. I would also encourage you that if you've been invited to this seminar by another coach than myself, and you would prefer to have that one-to-one time with either Kyle Kalu or Christopher Lawrence, please go ahead and do that as well. Our point is that we want to be able to support you in achieving the results that you want from the Mastering Difficult Conversations. So we'd like you to be able to reach out to book that complimentary one-to-one session. For next week, whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever we end up deciding when that is, I want you to come up with all of your what ifs. So what if, Carrie, it derails? What if my boss says, no way, I don't care, shut up or pack your desk? Like, what happens if my boss says that? What happens if my husband says, I am never having this conversation with you again? It is what it is, and that's it. So I want all of your what ifs to be brought to the next call, so we can really start to be able to work through some of those examples of what you're willing to share. So, what a minute. Next week, obviously, we're going to also talk about knowing when to quit. There does get to a point in several of these conversations where you have to start to ask yourself whether it's worth it or not. And so we'll talk about what do those key elements need to look like to know when to quit your conversation. Okay, so I hope you all have an awesome week. I'll be emailing you about Tuesday. I think it's going to be Tuesday is what's been requested. That way everybody's back in. And if you can't make the Tuesday call, that's okay. We'll have it recorded anyways. But no call on Monday. And I look forward to talking to you guys all in the Q&A. Have a good night, guys. Oops, I did it again.